to, usually at this point, I sort of do a little Q&A. You know, if anybody has any questions about Chester Carlson and the early days of Xerox, I try to answer them if I can. Has anything occurred to anybody?
Whatever happened to Elsa?
I don't know. Nobody knows. I did go out to the old neighborhood one day, out to Astoria, and I talked to one of the neighbors out there who knew them. She was the one who told me the story about Elsa going to Reno, meeting the cowboy, marrying the cowboy. That may be true. I don't know. She did later become Elsa Watson. And in Chet's papers, you see references to alimony payments to an Elsa Watson. But beyond that, I really don't know. And I even wonder about the story about the cowboy, because she did get the divorce in New York, not in Nevada. So I don't know. As far as I know, the room, I'm one of the few people who's ever visited that room where Chet made that first copy in 1938. That same year, or a little later, about 1988, I met a couple of Xerox executives out in Queens because there'd been a plaque on the side of the building, and some vandals had taken the plaque down. And they wrote to Xerox and said, "You really should put the plaque back." And I was very pleasantly surprised. They called me up and they said, "Gee, that's a great idea. Why don't we meet in Astoria and see about it?" So I met these two Xerox guys, and one of them had known Chet, had worked with him. And we went upstairs, and Chet's old landlord was still there. He was an old dentist, and he was getting ready to retire. And we asked him, we said, is the room still there? He said, "Oh, yeah, it's right in there." Right? And it was we went inside. It was a small room, and there was it. And the two Xerox guys were visibly moved, sort of like discovering Valley Forge. And one of them said, "Gee, talk about getting back to your roots." And then the other one started laughing. And I asked him, I said, "What's so funny?" And he pointed to a broken Canon copier sitting on a desk. So there we are. Yes?
Is there a plaque marking his birthplace in Seattle?
No, there's not. I opened the play in Seattle in March of last year, and I went to 308 Dexter Avenue. The house is gone, and in its place is a print shop. And over the door it says, "Quick Printing." So, yeah.
What happened to his fortune after all? I'm assuming his wife inherited it, perhaps.
Yes. He became, I believe, the wealthiest inventor in American history. The Xerox machine was the single most commercially successful invention in American history. And Carlson made over $200 million from it in his lifetime. He gave away 80% of it. He would have given it all away if he'd lived long enough. That really was his last wish. Her adopted daughter has what's left of it, and I asked her about the money. It's always a tough question to ask somebody. And she said, "Well, I'm trying to get rid of the rest of it," so I presume she is. Yes?
In the surveys about the possible success of the 1940 were so bad, and Joe Wilson initially didn't want to sell it. What made him change his mind later on?
Well, they had spent so much money. It wasn't a survey that originally Joe Wilson had even wanted to do. IBM wanted to go into a partnership with them just before the end. IBM would put out the machines and so on. And IBM did a market research survey, and the results were very disappointing. Nobody was interested. And then Xerox did one themselves, and the results were still disappointing. But they had spent so much money, they simply had no choice but to go on. Joe Wilson really bet the company on the one invention. If the 914 had failed, that would have been it. They would have been out of business. Yeah.
Do you know any more about the crucial transition from the 14-step train operator pizza box to the 914 that can be operated by an ordinary person? Seems to me that is really the most important.
Oh, sure. That's a tremendous story. And that was a tremendous engineering operation. I actually made a copy recently on one of the old, they called them the ox box for some reason. It was made out of wood, handmade. And I finished, and this old Xerox engineer, he said, "Congratulations, my boy, you are now a xerographer," which was something. But to go from that to the 914, what are you looking at? You're looking at 10 years and a tremendous amount of... Horace Becker is someone... Well, you should call me, or I should call you, because I could, or Horace Becker could tell you so much. He was the guy who really supervised the engineering of the 914, and he said it was awful. And Horace, he loves to say, said, "Everybody, I drove them so hard, I know what they say about me. They say I'm a son of a bitch. Well, I had to be a son of a bitch, make Joe Wilson look like a nice guy, so we could get the machine out." But that was it. He said that he fought with everybody about tolerances, things you'd never think about. He said when they tried to make copies back around that time, the paper would blister like crazy. And he figured out that the paper manufacturers, they sold paper by weight, and they still do. And they deliberately would put water in the paper. And he just fought with them to get them to decrease the water content. But there are 1,000 stories like that one. And it was a tremendous engineering feat. And as many of you know, those early machines didn't really work very well. Joe Wilson was really afraid to let them out of the factory. Yes?
We had a replica of an early machine. It looked kind of like it should make a copy. It had
Yeah.
bright silver side.
Oh, yes.
Big
Oh,
bulb
yes.
at the top.
Yeah.
Is this
Yeah.
the one from Precise Engineering?
No, that was the one that Millikan built for him around 1940. And I think that's in the Smithsonian now. But that was his first machine. And it did work, but very briefly. Yeah.
Very pretty.
Yes. Yeah.
Kind of just a thought.
Yeah. Yeah. It has a kind of Flash Gordon look to it.
Yeah. That's
Yeah, I hate to interrupt, but it is the time to officially close the forum. So we really invite people to stay afterwards and ask George additional questions. But I think we should give him a really big hand.